Okay, so for those of you who are around when we hit 500 subscribers, you might be wondering what the heck is going on with the 500 subscriber competition. And that would be a valid question since we're now sitting at over 1,000 subscribers. Yeah, sorry about that. Anyway, basically what happened was we got some entries, but the entries were all really good designs, so I didn't feel that I could make a hard and fast decision about which one should win. So I took the designs down to my local wargaming group. Fortunately, we have a few people who do historic naval tabletop wargames, and they were able to crib the stats that were given into a wargame capable format. And we ran a number of battles, squadrons of 4 against squadrons of 4. But obviously, wargaming groups only meet every so often, and you need certain people there for this kind of wargaming. So it's taken a little while to get the final decisions to come through. But we have them, so let's start off with the entries. So one of the first decisions taken was actually to split the entries into separate categories because there were some fairly clear dividing markers um, between some of the entries, and it would be unfair to pit some versus others. So the entries were battle cruisers, fast battleships, and medium speed battleships. We didn't actually have any slow battleship entries. Anyway, enough talk. Entry number one. So entry number one, the first of the battle cruisers, the Bellerophon class. This came in with a speed of 26 knots, an armament of 6 14-inch guns in twin turrets, as you can see there, a rather hilarious 22 6-inch secondary guns in twin turrets, 12.5-inch belt, 4.5-inch deck, medium range, 15-inch armor on the turrets, notably weak torpedo defense, and it doesn't have all or nothing armor. It actually has the all over the place armor of earlier ships, and it's coal powered. So hooray for that. Next up was the Xiaomi class, really bloody fast, 32 knots. Same kind of armament, 6 14-inch guns in twin turrets, 12 6-inch single guns for secondary battery, 12-inch belt, 4-inch deck, short range, 14-inch on the turrets. It has better torpedo defense than the Bellerophon, but it has a tertiary battery. A nice throwback there. So this was actually the hardest of all the categories to decide. The scores were basically near level. They have pretty much the same main battery. The Bellerophon is slightly more heavily armored, but not by much. The Xiaomi has a better torpedo defense. Um, but ultimately, over all the war games that were played out, there was just a very, very slight 23 victories to 22 in favour of the Bellerophon. Although the Xiaomi is massively faster, and that means it can basically dictate the range, the fact of the matter was that the Bellerophon has this extra fuel capacity, and the fuel capacity meant that the Bellerophon could stay at high speeds for longer, and effectively could just run the Xiaomi down eventually, kind of like a Terminator gently coming after you. And that secondary battery, once you actually got into secondary battery range, good lord, that thing was terrifying. Um, so yeah, by the tiniest of margins, victory there goes to the Bellerophon. Next up, we have the Hydra class. This was one of the two entries for fast battleship. With a speed of 28 knots, carries 8 16-inch guns in twin turrets, 12 5-inch guns in twin turrets as a secondary battery, 14-inch belt, 4-inch deck, short range, 16-inch thick turrets, reasonable torpedo defense. Yeah, it's a overall pretty damn solid design. Fairly well protected. Very nice firepower on 35,000 tons. Actually exceeds the firepower that virtually all treaty battleships that actually kept to the weight limit, not looking at you, Bismarck, North Carolina, etc. Um, anyway, so yep, that was entry number one. Going on to entry number two. This entry is the Audacity, same speed, different main armament, 9 15-inch guns in triple turrets all mounted forward, all Nelson style, Slightly thinner belt at 13 inches, sorry. 4.5-inch deck, so slightly thicker. Short range again. 15-inch turrets. Ridiculously high torpedo defense. Um, yeah, this was a bit of an interesting one. It's kind of like a halfway house between Nelson and King George V. Wonder why the Royal Navy didn't actually consider something like this in real life. Um, as I say, slightly heavier secondary battery there. 16 5-inch guns in twin turrets. So, now this was actually a really interesting one to decide because on paper you might think the Hydra actually has the advantage there. Thicker belt, thicker turrets, similar deck. Um, Secondary battery at this kind of caliber firepower is not so much of an issue, and it's got those 16-inch guns. However, when it was run through the wargaming scenario in Squadrons of Four, as I said, it was yeah, it was close again. These ships, all these ships are very well designed, but actually the Audacity did come out ahead. It won 29 games versus the Hydra's 26. And that basically comes down to that Nelson-like layout. It meant that when the ships started out beyond each other's range, as they closed the range, the Audacity was able to get long and medium range volleys in with all of its main guns, whereas the Hydra had to turn to unleash its full firepower. And that, in some cases, you can see because it was very close, but it did give the Audacity the edge because you would get things like hits to fire control systems and other such things that would damage or cripple the incoming Hydras. So yeah, Audacity is the winner of that particular category. And finally, we have the last category, the medium speed battleships, leading off with the Wotan class, 26 knots, 9 15-inch guns in triple turrets. Rather interesting secondary layout. 12 6-inch guns, but in triple turrets, kind of like Yamato there. A 15-inch belt, 3.5-inch deck, medium range, 15-inch thick turrets, very high torpedo defense, but bizarrely 12 4-inch guns in a tertiary battery. Don't know what's going on there, but there you go. So yeah, that's entry number 1. And here we have entry number 2, the Puerto Rico class battleship. So this has, as you can see, 8 15-inch guns in twin turrets, 12 5-inch guns in twin turrets, a 15.5-inch thick belt. This is the most heavily protected of all the entries. A 5-inch thick deck, again, most heavily protected deck of all the entries. Short range, 13.5-inch thick turret armor. And of course, a relatively decent torpedo defense score. So compared to the fast battleship entries, these ships sacrificed some of their firepower for a bit more heavy armor. Now, this one was another rather interesting one. The Wotan class's thin deck really didn't do it any favors in long-range engagements. However, we were playing at 1930s treaty battleship rules, so that meant no radar, fire control systems and such, so the number of deck hits was not a tremendous amount. And when it got into closer range, the heavier turret armor and the combined firepower of those 6-inch triples was a bit more effective than the 5-inch twins and these thinner turret armor on the Puerto Rico. So these ships had the same number of battles as the Hydra and Audacity, and they came in actually with an exact reverse of the score, 29 versus 26. So in this case, the Wotan is actually the winner. In the opinion of the players who took part in the game, the slightly increased turret survivability and that extra gun on the Wotan were basically the deciding factors. So there you have it. The respective winners of their categories were the Bellerophon by a hair and the Audacity and Wotan classes in the fast and medium battleship categories. Right, so what does this all mean? Well, it means that there are 3 winners, and I guess if you are still watching, and I hope you are, there's a lot more subscribers since I made that initial subscriber competition video, and hopefully you're still here. Please get in contact with me. You know the email. Refer back to the original 500 subscriber competition video if you need to, and basically tell me what ship class you want me to review. I'll stick those on the list, and also please, if you do want the physical model, tell me which one you want. Obviously, it has to be manufactured in the scale I said because I don't have a 3D printer, so I can't just randomly come up with new ships, unfortunately. Now, as for the runners-up, the collective decision of the Wargaming group is that I should also do something for the runners-up because there were no bad designs. So I can't just say, sorry, that's just rubbish, because they weren't. They're all pretty good combatants. So for the runners-up, I'm going to extend to you the compensatory prize, I guess. So you can have one of two things, and it's down to your choice. And obviously, kind of this also applies to the winners as well when it comes to videos. You can either have me make a video on the fictionalized history of the ship that you submitted, and that applies to everybody. You just obviously have to give me enough backstory to actually make a video. Because I can't really make much up off of just the stat lines. I know some of you already did, and that's appreciated. Or you can have the model of your choice as described. So basically, winners get both, runners up get to choose one or the other. I hope that's clear. Hope I haven't rambled too much. Dear Lord, this is going on for a long video. I think this is probably the longest video I've actually made. But anyway, onwards and upwards. We're nearly at 1,500 subscribers. I think 1414 at last check. So since we've just gone straight past the 1,000 mark, I guess we'll hold on to that or some other significant figure for the next competition. And hopefully we'll get that one sorted a little bit quicker. All right. Cheers, guys.